blind spots that he notices would just like people getting extra time on tests and things like that, just because he hasn't really struggled with that. And he is a fully functioning person. He's never had a disability. Riley talked about how she has diabetes and some things like that. And so she honestly, her blind spots are seeing people that are able and kind of being jealous of them and criticizing them for them having that advantage. In a video titled How Greg Abbott Won Millions by Brooke Washa, she talks about how he was paralyzed from the waist down. He sued the homeowner and the company of the tree that wasn't taken care of, that fell on him, and won like a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. But later he imposed stricter rules on why you can't do as many civil lawsuits as that, making it unfair. Like, he was able to do that, so why should it be easier? So I think a lot of even disabled people can start to be like, oh, well, this benefited me, but maybe it shouldn't benefit someone else. So it's really important to have that open mindset and that broad landscape of like, this was really helpful to me, I hope it's helpful to someone else. And I think that comes with not being selfish, not being too focused on yourself and like, how can I make society better for everyone? And ultimately that should be our goal. In my interviews, Ryan talked about, in a lecture by Alexander Hernandez on March 22nd, we talk about the eugenics movement, which is the worst thing sociology has ever done. We're basically saying that anybody that has a disability or isn't as helpful to society, we need to make these people categorized and we need to not have those babies. Or if a disability runs in a family, then that woman shouldn't be able to have a child. And so that is something we need to actively fight against. Not that it's as popular as it is to this day, but sometimes, whether we like it or not, these ideas like, oh, they're less helpful to society, can infiltrate even us, someone with a disability, like, oh, like, this would be more beneficial, but like, everybody has strengths and weaknesses, and our weaknesses can make us stronger. And they're not going to need that much from you or ask that much from you because they've spent so much of their lives defending themselves. They're great communicators. And really the list goes on and on. And one of her number one reasons is that they're great workers because they had to overcome obstacles. Their problem solving skills are very high. They're very skilled at quick thinking. Lauren Shalish talks about why we need to include people with disabilities in the workforce. In a lecture by Alexander Hernandez on March 7th, we talked about social groups and the idea that there are social groups throughout society and throughout disabled people. The deaf community is a great example as a social group. They group together because they have something very dramatic in common. And I think, I'm not fully deaf, but I'm still a part of the deaf community, and just raising awareness of what that looks like and what that's like, and like the benefits of having to overcome a challenge like an impairment as such. I think a way to eliminate these obstacles and challenges, such as grouping people with disabilities in the same categories, is by truly just raising awareness. And she talked a lot about how people just didn't see the water. She also talks about how the fight for disability rights still isn't over, and there still should be protests and an emphasis on ongoing changes that need to be made. She's someone that protested rights for disabled people, protested things like, I should be able to go vote, why is it inaccessible? In a TED Talk by Judith Heumann called Our Fight for Disability. In another lecture by Alexander Hernandez on March 24th, we talk about the curb cut effect, which is where if we make one accommodation for someone with a disability, then everybody's going to benefit. Then everybody's going to hear better. Or then people that are older will be able to get above a curb, even though that little walkway is intended for someone in a wheelchair, things like that. Everyone will end up benefit. Parents on strollers and some things like that. In a lecture by Dr. Hernandez on April 1st, he talked about how there was a student and they were in a wheelchair and the school wouldn't make an accommodation for one person to have assistance getting down to be able to sit in the lecture class instead of sitting at the weight in the very back of the classroom all by themselves. They were like, that's only one student. The thing is, it's not just only one student, even if it's just one student that speaks up about. And I think we do that a lot in society. Oh, if this person needs help with this, then that means every disabled person needs assistance in this certain way, but it looks different for every person. When I first was coming to A&M freshman year, I was going to live on campus, I was going to live in the dorm, but I needed some modifications to the dorm room, such as like a doorbell and like an extra fire alarm and just some things like that. So we applied for like a disability room, or just like put that on my sheet as a student with a disability. And then I was put in a room that was wheelchair accessible, and there was nothing that was hearing, didn't help with hearing at all. Everything was about being wheelchair accessible. There was like all the light fixtures were lower, an automatic door. So it really had nothing to help with my individual disability. It is the idea that all disabilities look the same. So I am a disabled student. I have a hearing. One challenge that people with disabilities have that should be eliminated, I think there shouldn't be a penalty on being disabled. In fact, the penalty is being disabled in a society that is. There's also a systematic issue called the marriage penalty, where SSI recipients risk benefit reduction or loss if they marry, and the assets are capped at $3,000, which is a complete obstruction and unfairity to society and to people that are saying that medical reviewers do not have direct contact with applicants. Oliver criticizes the Social Security Administration, or SSA. In a summary of disability benefits on Last Week Tonight, an example of this is one of my aids that I have. I'm a competitive swimmer, and so when I race, I have a light that is by my butt, because obviously I can't wear hearing aids when I swim. So a light goes off that tells me when I need to go if I can't hear the buzzer and things like that. And I've had people come up to me and be like, why do you get that? Like, I want one of those. And it's like, well, it's because you had the advantage of hearing. It's also an important reminder that just because you have aid doesn't mean there's favoritism. Like, you have aid because you have a disadvantage. When it comes to being in the front of the line and some things like that, in a discussion on March 26th by Professor Hernandez, we talked about challenges and obstacles, and the idea that people are always checking to see if you have an unfair advantage, such as handicap parking. We've all been there, gotten super annoyed that nobody's sitting in those first 4 parking spots. So I think just awareness is really important when it comes to that. And I think these blind spots exist just because I wasn't made aware. I wasn't told by my teachers growing up that, hey, just so you know, these students have this disability, so we have to help them in something that you might not need help in. And there were areas that I needed help in. I have hearing loss, and I remember the very first day I got diagnosed with hearing loss was in kindergarten. And I went to school, and my teacher put my head like under the lumens thing that would like show, paper and stuff back in the day. And she was like, this is what a hearing aid looks like. This is why Lorelai has to sit at the front of the class. And, I thought hearing aids were really cool at the time. So I wasn't embarrassed, but if anything, I think it helped made students aware of like, okay, like I have a hearing impairment. I wear hearing aids. This is why I need this extra help, or why Lorelai automatically gets a front seat or front of the line and some things like that. So I think making people aware is really helpful. And I think when that doesn't happen, we develop those blind spots. I also have a lot of friends that have like a learning disability, like dyslexia and some other things like that. And that's something that I don't have. So at first, when I was especially younger and I was like, oh, they get more time testing, they get more help reading, I never really understood that it was because they had that learning disability. And that wasn't because I was like, I don't care about them. It was just because I thought it was unfair, because I didn't realize that that was something that they struggled with that I didn't. So I've never thought about things like how hard it would be to get onto the curb, or why society isn't built in order to help people that don't have that ability. Blind spots that I've noticed within myself in regard to physical or cognitive disabilities are things like what life would be like to be paralyzed. One, because I have functioning legs. What is ableism? Ableism is the discrimination of and social prejudice against people with disabilities based on the belief that typical abilities are superior. Disabilities that they'd like to end, and both of them kind of talked about this, is just, judgment of other people, like looking at somebody like, why are they taking so long to learn? You don't always have understanding. Another lecture we talked about how a disabled person can look like someone in a wheelchair, but can also look like someone walking across the street. It doesn't look the exact same, and that is my point. So I agree with them on that. And then they wanted to eliminate it by also just kind of making people aware, making things more accessible, like whether it's going to the university, going to A&M, and making it a bigger deal than it is, which I completely agree with, because as a school, as a society, as a country, like, we need to be together on this in the fight to make people with disabilities feel loved and accepted and welcomed